Ladies and gentlemen, welcoming to the Ray Carr Show is Mr. Bob Sarles. Now, Bob is a filmmaker that has put together one of the greatest movies I've seen in years, the Bert Berns story, Bang Records. And Bob, really, let's get into that. How did that come about for you?
Well, I'm a filmmaker. This is how I make my living. I'm a journeyman filmmaker. My wife and I have a small production company called Raven Films in San Francisco and Los Angeles. It's really just the two of us. And we produce a lot of content that's music content, music documentaries, performance films, and things like that. I also have another career simultaneous with that. I'm a freelance film and television editor, and I have a television series in Los Angeles. I find myself in Los Angeles a lot, editing mostly unscripted television series. And I sort of checkerboard between doing these things. A lot of times I'm doing the television work because that pays the bills, and sometimes that's quite interesting. But the music stuff is really the stuff that I feel more passionate about. And when those opportunities come by, I jump on them, and it's built up a body of work over the years. It's sort of come together. Now, the Bert Berns story fell in my lap because the person who originated the film, my co-director, who's really the primary producer of the film, is Brett Berns, who's the son of Bert Berns. And he wanted to make a documentary about his father, who's not well known, although he was one of the greatest songwriters and one of the most important record producers of the 60s. And so about 8 or 9 years ago, he embarked on the journey of trying to make this documentary. And he was really smart about it because he hired really good professional people to help him. So the production value was really good. And he tracked down all these people who worked closely with his father and gathered these interviews over the years and started putting together this film. Now, about 2 years ago, my friend Joel Selvin, who's a very well-known author and music critic in San Francisco, who's been a friend of mine for decades, he published a book, a biography about Bert Berns. It's called Here Comes the Night, is the title of his book. And Joel introduced me to Brett, and then Brett invited me to help him finish his film. So he had been working on the film for about 8 years. I came on the last year, and because of my background as an editor, really took all the footage that he had gathered and put it together so that we told the story and with my wife Christina Keating, who's my filmmaking partner. She did all the deep research and found all this incredible footage and helped me find the story. And we put together this film. It's an incredible story. I was very fortunate to have something of this quality sort of fall into my lap.
Oh,
it's been a great experience.
Bob Sarles, our special guest here on the Ray Carr Show. Bob, I have to say, it was put together. I went in with some expectations it was going to be good, but not this good. It was amazing how you were able to put all that together, get the interviews and really bring out that story to a lot of people that just knew maybe bits and pieces. But when you put it all together the way you did, it's like, my God, this whole new world of rock and roll is opened up to us, and we're really grateful that you did that.
Well, thanks. The film really works because there's the music is so fantastic, and Brett and I really worked closely on trying to find the deep tracks that would help us thematically and narratively put it together so that the glue of the whole film is the music. Now, Bert Berns, he had a very short career, 7 years. He didn't start getting traction in his career until his early 30s, and he was dead at the age of 38. And so a very short career. And in that time, he produced over 300 records that he wrote and produced. And of those, 50 were, 50 of them charted really, really high. Many were hits. And he had number one hit with Hang On Sloopy. But there are many other songs, deep tracks, that aren't as well known. And Brett knew those songs. Nobody knows the catalog better than Brett does. And he helped us, find the right songs to, and music. And what we did was we did something that I originally thought was going to be not really possible, but at Brett's insistence, we did this, which was we pretty much scored the film entirely with needle drop of records that were Bert Berns productions. Now, in certain cases, there were licensing issues for certain songs that Bert Berns didn't write that we had in the soundtrack. And in that case, we actually hired my friend Barry Goldberg, a very famous musician and composer on his own right, came in and composed some other incidental cues that were used to replace music that we didn't license or places where we needed some particular score dramatically. And Barry brought in some of the best musicians in Los Angeles into the studio, and that represents maybe 10% of the music that you hear in the film. But the 90% of it is actually needle drop music from records that Bert Berns produced. And the other thing was that we had Joel Selvin's incredible biography about Bert Berns, and at one point I realized that we were going to have some narration. So what I did was I extracted the narration from the text of the book. The book is about 400 pages long. We extracted about 20 pages of text out of that book, and then that was, I don't want to say that the narration was read, it was really performed by the great Stephen Van Zandt, guitarist from the E Street Band and famous for playing Silvio in The Sopranos. And he read the narration, and his performance really brings great level to it. So there's a lot of things converging to in the storytelling process to really make it work.
Absolutely, it really does work. And what were some of the records that were tough to get that you were able to put in the film?
Records, you're saying?
Yeah, the songs and records. I mean, you showed a lot of 45s.
Yes. What
were some of the more difficult ones that a lot of people may not have realized that Bert did?
Well, geez, that's hard for me. I can mention some deep tracks, but if they're deep enough, people won't even really know them. But one of the great songs that's in the film, it wasn't difficult to get. I mean, visually to actually see the records. You do eBay these days, you can find anything.
Right.
And Brett had spent years collecting every record his father was ever involved in. So we had all the recordings. And in terms of clearing it, to be honest with you, our first cut of the film had some Neil Diamond music in it because Neil Diamond's part of the story. But if you see the story, there was a big falling out between Neil and Bert, and so we would have needed Neil Diamond's permission to include those songs in the film. And by the time that came around that we had to start screening the film, we had never received those permissions. So we made a pragmatic decision to lose that music from the film and compose other music to replace it that was not Neil Diamond music. So I would say that would be because Neil Diamond did not participate in this film, that was probably the most difficult music to get, and we didn't get it.
Yeah, I understand. Why do you think the falling out happened between Neil Diamond and Bert Berns?
Well, the film tells a story and the book tells a story. It's kind of, out there as a public record at this point. Neil they had such great success out of the gate at Bang Records. It was like some of the first records at Bang Records, which was Bert Berns' record company, that they put out were Neil Diamond records, and it was like Cherry Cherry, Kentucky Woman, Solitary Man, hit. And these songs had a certain hook to them, a certain they were pop songs, and they were written to be popular songs. And Bert was trying to keep his company afloat and to generate money and profits, and he wanted another hit out of Neil. And Neil had composed a song called Shiloh, which was this very introspective, lyrical song about an imaginary friend that he had as a child. Yeah. It's like the old thing. Well, where's the hook? This isn't going to be a hit. And that was Bert's attitude. And he said, no, we're not going to release this. My mind is lapsing right now. I think it might have been Kentucky Woman was the song that they put out.
I think you're right. It was the Kentucky. I think you're right.
And Neil was not happy about that. And he wanted to have creative control over his own career. And so that started, a schism between them. And Neil's creative people that he was working with, the people that were really producing his songs, were Ellie Greenwich and Jeff Barry, who were good friends of Bert Berns. And so what wound up happening was Neil sued to have his contract basically annulled, and they found a loophole, a conflict of interest in terms of the lawyer who wrote up the contract, and Neil Diamond was able to walk away from Bang Records, and Neil Diamond was the biggest artist. I mean, he was a breakout star, and after just a few hits, walked away from his record company and worked with other record companies after that. So there was a lot of bitterness there on both sides about that, and as the film tells the story, Bert, the record business in the '60s in those days was very much the mob was very much part of the fabric.
Yeah,
of the record industry.
Very salacious.
And some people sort of begrudgingly did business. I mean, everybody did business with the mob. I mean, there was just because they were running certain parts of the record business, and so that's just the way it was. That's just the way the record business evolves. So there was no real avoiding that. However, Bert how can I delicately say that? He sort of enjoyed that side of it. That excited him, that he was hanging out with these wise guys, and he kind of relished in it.
Really?
Yeah. And so Bert was a bit more mobbed up than most guys.
Yeah.
So when Neil left, Bert wasn't such a great guy sometimes. So he wasn't happy about it. And Neil Diamond's manager, Fred Weintraub, who just passed away the other day, I saw at the age of 88. Fred Weintraub got roughed up on the street. He got mugged by some bad guys on the street. And Neil Diamond was playing at Fred's club, the Bitter End, in Greenwich Village, and the place got cleared out by some stink bombs that somebody threw in. Now, there's no proof that Bert Berns had anything to do with it, but he probably did. It was, and so Bert's long gone. Neil Diamond's very, I can't get inside Neil Diamond's head,
Right.
Some people might say after a half century, maybe you forgive and forget. But I'm not the person who was a victim of what he was victimized by, And, some people hold grudges. So I don't pass any judgment on that. It's not my history. I'm just telling the story.
Filmmaker Bob Sarles, our special guest here on the Ray Carr Show. Bob, where else will the movie be playing? Because I know a lot of people that I personally know would like to see it.
Well, our journey in terms of showing the film began just about a year ago. South by Southwest is starting up as we speak, and we premiered exactly a year ago at South by Southwest, and we were well received there. And we decided that our strategy for this film would be to really ride out the film festival circuit for a year, because we were getting good success of being accepted into film festivals. It really became a crowd favorite, and there was some momentum going on it. So we decided to ride that, because my fear is that if we distributed the film too early, we wouldn't be able to overcome the fact that nobody knows who Bert Berns is. The film will educate you as to who the Bert Berns is, and do it in a very entertaining way. It tells a good story. But to get people into the theaters, you kind of have to get the word out. And so that's what the whole film festival thing was about. And one of our wrap-up screenings was the other night at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame where we met. And so we're coming to an end of that, and at the end of April, beginning of May, we're going to be opening up in theaters across the country, usually single theater art houses across the country, or multiplex type art houses. I can't yet announce where we're going to be playing, but we're hoping to be in about 30 or 40 cities across the country, starting at the end of April and through the spring, and then and hopefully we'll play for a week or two in each city and get good reviews and get some people to come out into the theaters to see us, and then there'll be a couple months after that a DVD release, and sometime in between that, video on demand. And we're also in the process of negotiating hopefully a major cable release and streaming, all that kind of stuff, all the different avenues that films come to people these days. We'll be exploiting all those in the spring and into the summer and through the end of the year.
Well, that sounds great, because I can't wait to get it on DVD and watch it over and over again. Bob Sarles, our special guest. Bob, you started your film career in Buffalo, New York.
Yes. Well, I didn't start my career there, but that's where I grew up, and that's where I began making films. I didn't start making money at it until I moved out to the West Coast. But yeah, I was sort of a film brat. I grew up in the 60s. I watched a lot of television. I started making Super 8 films probably in the late 60s. And just kept pursuing it. And then when I went away to college in the mid-70s, I moved to Boston and went to film school at Boston University and started getting more serious about it. When I graduated from film school at BU, I briefly moved to Los Angeles because I got into grad school at UCLA, and I thought that would be a good thing to do. But I made the mistake of driving through San Francisco on my way to LA. And I really fell in love with the San Francisco Bay Area and San Francisco, the city itself. And so shortly after moving to Los Angeles, I finished up, I think, a semester. And then I dropped out of film school, and I moved up to San Francisco in 1980 and began my career as an editor here. And primarily, I've made my living as an editor for the last 37 years. And but over the years, I've also migrated to Los Angeles a lot. I actually spent most of the last 6 years living in Los Angeles, editing television series. But now I'm back in San Francisco, and I have a place in LA, I have a place in San Francisco. I've learned to love LA over the years, but San Francisco has been my home.
That's great. And you've also done a number of other very interesting projects, and one of them was a documentary called Feed Your Head: The Psychedelic Era.
Yes. That was a film that I was commissioned to make for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, who've been a client of mine for 22 years, I guess, since the museum opened up. I had a friend and client in Los Angeles, Joel Gallen, who had a company called the 10th Planet Production. And for many years, up until very recently, they produced the annual Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ceremony. And so I would work for Joel producing short tribute films for the Rock Hall ceremony, and that continued up until just a couple years ago. And so I established a relationship with the people in Cleveland and have produced a lot of films for the museum over the years. And 20 years ago, they asked me to make a film about the psychedelic music era that was shown for about a year and a half when they had an exhibit called I Want to Take You Higher, which was made to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the Summer of Love. So that was a short film. I think it was about 23 minutes long, and we interviewed a lot of